If you want to learn how to create VR games while working full-time, then listen to Alex State's story and be inspired. So let's get to it. You are listening to the How to Create VR podcast, weekly conversations with VR professional creators, designers, and producers. Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Create VR podcast, where I speak with professional creators, designers, developers, and producers who work on VR, AR, and MR projects. I'm your host, Marcelo Lewin, founder of howtocreatevr.com, your go-to source for VR education. My guest today is Alex State, a programmer since the age of 10. His passion for VR took off when he spent hundreds of dollars playing the arcade-style Virtuality games in the early 90s. He owns all three versions of the Oculus Rift and has two Vives, the Samsung Odyssey, and both versions of the Samsung Gear VR. His startup, Slipgate Studios, produces VR games and is currently working on his second title. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Marcelo. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Pleasure to have you here. I met you at NAB. It was literally the last day, and I think it was literally the last half hour I think we only had before they shut down the entire show.
Yeah, the show closed at 4, and you and I were still talking about having this podcast today.
I think so, yeah. And I felt so lucky because I was actually going to take off because I was so tired after 3 days of NAB. And then I found out the gaming pavilion, I think it was called the Gaming Pavilion.
Game Developers Gallery.
That's it, Game Developers Gallery. I'm like, wow, I can't believe I missed that. So I go and I meet you, and man, you totally inspired me on everything VR because, as we'll find out very soon, you live, you eat, and everything else VR, which is fantastic.
Yes, I'm excited to tell you all about it.
Before we do that, I already gave a little background of you, but maybe you can expound on it a bit.
So I was an only child to a stay-home mom, and my dad was a hardware engineer, and he fixed mainframe computers. To entertain myself, my dad bought me a video game system, so I grew up with Pong and the Atari 2600. And then around 1980, he finally got me my first personal computer. It was what was called a Motorola 6800 processor, and it did have 1K of memory. And so with that computer, I started to learn programming. I started with assembly language and worked my way up to BASIC, and then C and C++. And so back in those days, there was lots of magazines that featured their source code for games and applications. And they called it a listing of a program because the command to bring up the program is generally the word list. So I learned both how to type and debug other people's code by typing in hundreds of programs, both games and normal business applications from those magazines. Many of those programs took me several days to type in, and I mainly played them for maybe 20 minutes when I got done. But just the reward of taking those words and those numbers off of those pages and making something happen on the screen was a complete thrill for me, and I'm still doing it 40 years later.
I think we're about almost close to the same age. I think you're a little bit younger than I am, and I grew up similar. I mean, I'm not an only child, but I've got two other brothers, but I was an introvert, and the computer was the thing for me. And man, my first computer was the VIC-20. I had more memory than you. I was better than you memory-wise because I had 3K, okay? And then I had a 5K expansion board. So I had a total whopping of 8K. So I totally can relate, and I can totally relate. Even doing the Hello World beginning, it was like, it blew my mind that I had the power to be able to do this. As opposed, I went from being a viewer of TV to being a creator and controlling what's happening in that TV. So that was really exciting. So I totally can relate to what you went through. So we'll speed forward because in 40 years, you've done a lot of stuff. Let's get to the point when you first experienced VR as a consumer. Tell me about that.
I completely remember it. So there was a company, as you mentioned earlier, called Virtuality that produced these headsets. They were very, very heavy, low resolution, high latency. They were actually ugly to look at. They had them here at the malls. I'm in Las Vegas. They were in casinos too, and they were an attraction. You would go there and just, hey, I got to do it. It was, it's $20 for just 10 minutes. But when I was able to get out of reality and put that headset on and see a completely virtual world, and wherever I looked, there was a robot or a pterodactyl. Nightmare was the name of the game I played, and I was able to shoot at it. I went, oh my gosh, this is going to transform gaming. And so I remember the old days of popping quarters into the arcade machines, as you probably do, and it was just a quarter back then, and that was that was great. But
and you build up that line of quarters because
Yep. But that day, putting that headset on is what made me want to start my own virtual reality company, Slipgate Studios, and it exists today because of that experience. Even 28 years ago, it was enough of an impact on me to go, that's what I want to do. Forget about 2D games and 3D, I need the VR games. So after doing that, then in late 2012, I heard about Palmer Luckey was coming out with this product, this virtual reality headset, and was like, oh boy, here we go again. Let's see what he does. And he came out with something called the Oculus Rift Developer Kit 1. So I bought that. I loaded up Unity for the first time. Unity 3D is the engine I'm using today. And I started making some simple scenes to kind of get an idea, what can I really do with this? With the programming I've done my whole life, what can I really accomplish? Back then in 2012, the computer I used was actually very slow, and I frequently get what people talk about as motion sickness, or they call it VR sickness now, and it would last me for several hours. But then I bought the Rift Developer Kit number 2 that came out like a year and a half later, upgraded my computer, and that's when I can truly say I started to have some great experiences in VR, having the good frame rate, and the people are starting to make some interesting content.
So from there, obviously, you moved on to the Rift, and the rest, as they say, is history. When did you decide to restart your gaming company and really focus on VR development? Was it during the DK1, or were you just experimenting and playing during that time?
Yeah, good question. I actually wanted to make a SimCity type game. In college, I built a game that was supposed to just simulate a grocery store. And for that class, you're supposed to just have numbers on the screen with a few figures about people entering the store and leaving the store, how long did they stay in line, and statistics like that. And I went nuts. I'm like, well, if I'm going to make a thing for college, I made it a 2D SimCity type thing where it actually showed customers walking into the screen, picking up a cart, doing their shopping and leaving. And my instructor was blown away. I was like the first student in his life that's seen it actually made a 2D representation of just a single grocery store with that. And so based on my experience playing SimCity and The Sims, the Will Wright series of games, I said, that's it. I want to see my SimCity game that I've been working on now for about 28 years. I want to see that thing in VR, to see my people that I've made walking around and watch the city build its stuff. So, if they ever made SimCity for VR, it'd be the very first game I want to play, because, the God style of game, being in control of an entire virtual civilization, to me is the most exciting thing to do with virtual reality, of being in control of all these virtual people and their lives, so to speak. So that was it for me.
So what's your favorite experience as of today? Because from then to today, I'm sure you've experienced tons of games, tons of other VR experiences. What would you point to that says, wow, this is truly incredible, pushing the limits?
So far my favorite, I'm going to break this into 2 categories. First one's going to be games, the next one will be experiences. Because games, for me, the one I play all the time is one called Audio Shield. It's where you basically put on these virtual boxing gloves and you fight your different songs that you can choose by punching at them. So you get a lot of exercise, plus you get to listen to cool music. It gets you moving around. So overall, the most amount of hours is definitely an Audio Shield. My next favorite one to do is, because it's fun to come home from work and just terrorize the city. Besides building one, you can terrorize one. There's one called King Kaiju, and where you get to play Godzilla and literally just pick up people and cars and bust buildings apart. To me, it is just so much fun. It was very popular at NAB. Women really got into it. So it's just fun to be able to destroy and not have to worry about the insurance and the police coming after you. And of course, the other one that I've just got to say, because there's so many people who love The Walking Dead, is I just love Arizona Sunshine, because killing zombies is just the ultimate thrill, isn't it?
It's an awesome game. It's a totally awesome game. I'm stuck in the level where you pull the lever and...
The bridge?
Not the bridge, but it plays music and you get this horde of zombies coming at you and you're supposed to kill them all, and I just can't get through that one.
You've made it further than I have. I'm still stuck at this bridge.
So
I'll get past it one day.
Now,
when it comes to experiences, ones that are not games, you're just experiencing it. I show 90% of the people for the first time the one by VR. It's just called The Blue, and it's got the whale in it and the underwater
fantastic
stuff. It's just graphically, it's just amazing to look at. Everyone loves it. I've had friends who've actually been scuba diving and said it really is an amazing experience with the particulates in the water and the way the music and the lighting is done. When
the whale comes at you with that big eye, it's just incredible. Yeah. You should also look at Titanic VR.
Oh, okay. I've not done that one.
It's incredible. It's truly incredible. And you're going down and you're visiting the Titanic, and you get it's a game, but it's also an experience. They've done an incredible job on that one.
The last thing I want to mention for experiences, although this is a game, but for me it was an experience, It was my first truly, I'd call it heavenly moment that I'd ever had in VR. And it's when I loaded up Microsoft Flight Simulator 10. I installed this driver called Fly Inside, which allows you to play several different cockpit games in virtual reality. I then took off from McCarran Airport right here in Las Vegas in an F-16. I flew into the clouds and I went by Phoenix, Arizona. I then decided to fly right down the strip, go right by all the hotels and by the Paris Tower we have. I then went off to Catalina Island, did a buzz by that island, and then I landed in San Francisco. That entire flight took me 90 minutes. I didn't take off my headset the entire time. And that was an experience I've been dreaming about since I first saw my jet when I was 8 years old. I've been wanting to have that experience. So VR brought that to me. And thankfully, I had a couple tissues near my computer because I had to get a few little tears out of my eye. It was such a almost religious experience for me to be able to do that. And nonstop, I literally took off and landed in F-16 and didn't have a crash or anything.
Yeah, once you fly in VR in a simulator, I play X-Plane 11.
Oh, yeah. Yep,
and they have a VR version, and it's once you do that, you don't want to go back to normal flight simulator.
And I got to bring up just one more, and this one is after listening to one of your recent podcasts, I finally went out and bought The Invisible Hours. And I just simply can't recommend this enough. Being an invisible participant in a story is just magical, and the ability to stop time and start time during this murder mystery is just so fulfilling. I just think that the talented crew over there at Tequila Works deserve an award for how amazing that is. So if you own a PSVR, a Rift, or a Vive, and you love cinema, you must go out and get The Invisible Hours. I'm going to have everybody I come over here at least do the first act of it and see what it's like to be in a movie. I loved when the actors would walk through me, or I could stand in the place of an actor and I could hear myself talk to another character in the game. It was just so much fun. I just love it to death.
It is. I have the interview. Anybody can go listen to it. It's I forget which episode it is, but it's with Rob Yascombe. And just go check it out. He's the director. He actually directed the entire VR experience. Anyway, we can go on for hours talking about our cool experiences, right? But what really inspired me when I met you was I've been toying with the idea. I've got to write my own VR, but I'm busy during the day, like everybody else. And it's there's always an excuse. Then at night, of course, Netflix. And then I talked to you and I'm like, my God, this guy works in the day. And then during the night or whenever he's got the time, he's doing VR experiences. And you've shown me your VR experience, which we'll talk about later. And it blew my mind. And it's okay, I'm inspired. I got to do this. Talk to us. How do you balance the day job with your VR game development at night? And what do you do during the day?
That is a very good question, Marcelo. So I've been a database programmer for the last 20 years, and I'm currently in the insurance sector. But to balance out your life, it requires being focused and planning out what needs to be accomplished each and every day to keep everyone happy. Keep the boss happy, keep my partner at home happy. And so at work, I have to-do lists with deadlines. And on some days, if I get behind schedule, then I'll need to sacrifice working on my own things to stay caught up at work. But when I'm at home and I finish my dinner, my girlfriend says, go create, be happy, and get your dreams made and go do it. And she leaves me alone. And so I just review
You are a lucky guy, I got to tell you that.
So I just reviewed the to-do lists that I've been making, for the previous whatever period of time, and I just focus on my own work, and I start adding in fixes to what I've been working on, and I get as much done as I can in a single night as possible. The weekends, of course, are when I can get most of my development done, and I frequently have people over to play my next iterations of my games and experience, because getting that feedback as soon as possible when you made changes to see if the public will like what you've done is really, really important. For relaxation, to keep the whole balance of the work and the play together, I've got into off-roading. I actually have a Jeep Wrangler. I love to go out with different clubs and get to see nature, the splendor of it, the quietness of it. And it turns out one of my favorite places in the world is Death Valley, California. With a name like that, you wouldn't think it would be that beautiful or lovely, but it's literally one of the most amazing places on earth that you can go. I remember going on one of my trips where it was 80 during the day, and at night it was 45 on the same day, and just climbing up the mountain in my Jeep, 35-degree difference on the same day. So just keeping that balance of having, your indoor and outdoor life be in balance. With VR, what's great about it is it makes you stand up, put on that headset, and you typically won't have lack of exercise issues. So that's what I like about it, is getting me off my butt and not just sitting at a keyboard all day.
Right. And I met you in person. You're a guy that's in shape. So how much time and money do you put into your VR? I'm talking about from the creation perspective, running that company. How much would you calculate time-wise do you have to invest for, and this is so people know what they're getting into when they're starting to do this.
Yeah, this is another kind of long answer, but I'll cover as much of it as I can. So I do everything on a shoestring budget. I find as many free game assets as possible. There's a bunch of different websites that have them. There's the Unity Asset Store where you get a lot of things for free. But when I need the assets, I will pay for them or hire talent. I'll discuss later where I find my people. So right now I'm investing about $2,000 to $3,000 per year on just assets. That's not hardware. That's not traveling. That's not promotion. Just acquiring the tools, the sounds, sound effects, art, materials I need. And $2,000 to $3,000 a year. Time-wise, of course, I spend every moment that I'm not at work, right? This is what I love to do. So if I'm not sleeping or relaxing, I am definitely making notes or coming up with level designs in my spare time. I'm an old-school developer, as we talked about earlier, and I don't leave the house without the tried and true physical notebook, pen and paper. I mean, that's what I used to write all my notes in. And so every idea, thought, concept that I come up with, I write it down in the notebook. And then once my thoughts and my ideas are then solidified, I then enter into a private Slack channel where I have the people that work with me can see all the ideas and concepts I have for the current game and future games. So like I said before, how much time does this take? Well, for the entire game process, the answer is, well, it depends. And as many true developers will say that you will never finish a game in your life. It's kind of hard to believe that, but you will never be done. There just comes a point. You just got to say it's close enough and move on to something else. And if you really have unfinished ideas, then you just need to go ahead and put them into the sequel. Most games, as we know today, come out with version 2 at some point or some sort of big update, and that's where then you can then take those other ideas you couldn't quite get done because you're out of time and put them in the sequel. That's basically the answer to that.
You said you're an quote-unquote old-time developer, right? But so usually when people think of developers, they don't think of quote-unquote creative people. And what I mean by creative is that balance between being technical and being creative, like graphically creative. How do you strike that balance? How much of that balance is required when you're creating a VR game? Because at the end of the day, it's visual, right? And you have to do some good stuff. So how do you strike that balance? How do you stay creative? Are you an observer of life in general? And that goes into also, you have to duplicate things that happen in life in VR experiences like gravity and the way you walk and just anything, right? So how do you strike that balance between creativity and technical?
So I personally am not a creative person. I can't make a stick figure that anybody would recognize from anything. I just can't do it. So for me, it all comes down to your desire to just make something. There's so many resources online for both creative work. If you need 3D models or sound effects and animations like I do, I can't make that stuff. I go out and I just find people who want to make that stuff, who've made one or will make one. I'm actually working with a gal right now in Germany that I met online, and she's making one asset for me, one character of one of my experiences. I got her focused on it. She's an art student, and she doesn't even want any money for it. She says, I just want the experience of making a game for somebody. I gave her some specs, and I'm getting feedback on that. So there's people out there, and I'll talk about later about how I found them and how they're finding me, of just they want to help, and including developers don't even want to write code. There's lots of forums and stuff where you can say, I'm having trouble with this piece of logic, and just post the code out and people will gladly fill in the blanks. So it doesn't matter where you lack, if it's on the art side or the technical side, people want to help. There's just so many forums that people want to give to help you out. I've also read, and this is kind of interesting, that every application ever written up to now will need to be rewritten for VR to take full advantage of room scale and the way the interfaces would work. So that means that every single person out there can help contribute to all the different applications that need to be rewritten one way or another. So just having an idea and wanting to put it out there, you can find the help. There's so many ways and places you can find people that want to help and give, even for free.
And how do you come up with the actual games? Because that's the part that you do, right? You come up with the idea of the game, the levels, how it's going to run and all that, and then you decide into your assets. What assets are you going to need? The props, the room, all that stuff. How do you come up with all that? Do you storyboard?
So what's interesting about my studio is I'm a collector, and I have 240 game boxes. starting with the game called Starship for the Atari 2600, which dates back to 1976. And the last game box on my wall is Avatar from 2009. And in between, I literally have every like Commodore 64, Atari ST, IBM PC, all the way up to the latest genre of games. So when I need ideas, I can literally turn behind me, look at 240 game boxes, and say, what did I like about that game? Or what was bad about that game? Or what art style can I steal? And it's basically, either pay respect to these games or just bring them to VR. Because again, VR is a completely different medium to experience a game, and you can take a game even like maybe like say Dig Dug from Atari and completely reimagine how you would be pumping through the walls and blowing up these characters, and it would be a completely fun and different experience. And most people won't even remember, hey, is this like Dig Dug from 1982 or whatever? So to me, it's just being inspired by looking at those boxes on the wall.
Yeah, I would love to make Space Invaders in VR. I think it would be totally cool.
Yeah. So just by looking at those games, I just grab bits and pieces of elements of gameplay and art and just say, how can I bring this to VR and make it profitable and make it interesting? For storyboarding, listen, you did ask about storyboarding. I want to get to that real quick here. So I do have 5 titles that I am working on with Slipgate Studios, but only one of them did I give the what I call the red carpet treatment of actually going through a storyboard process. That title is called Weekly Crime. And it's a tribute and a love letter to my favorite band. That's a Canadian rock band called Rush. And we're making their song called Red Barchetta, and we're bringing it to life as a 6-minute interactive video. That song is, very descriptive. There's lots of action in it, and it was naturally easy to storyboard out all the different scenes. There's a scene where you're on a train, and then you go to this barn, and you have to pull a tarp off the car, and you go for a ride. And so I worked with a guy, because again, I'm not an artist, who did all these about 15 storyboards for what it should look like. And then from there, I could really think of, okay, what assets do I need? What will it sound like in each of those scenes? Because you might miss out on the sound side. So it was just, that was the only one we've done up to now was that one. Everything else that I've done up to now, what I just do is I create what's called a mood board. So I think of an idea for a game. I start looking for images, go to Google and just type in, racing, and just start grabbing different images and styles and stuff from those. And then as I start to build my game, I go, yeah, I like the style of that track or those tires or whatever. And then have somebody, use that art to then make me what I need. I take a lot of my inspiration, of course, from television shows and movies, and we'll grab a lot of images from those. Because people understand that when you talk about a particular movie and a character, people can go, oh, yeah, I know what you mean by that. And then they can develop stuff based on those things. So I wish I had more time to storyboard, but most of my stuff is kind of just what they call mood boards.
Right. No, that's a great tip, actually. How do you QA games? Because you've got to, that's the part that's not really sexy, right? And then after a while, you probably want to say, God, I don't want to do this again. But what's your process for QAing games? You kind of mentioned a little bit before where you invite a lot of friends over and have them play it for you and give you feedback. But, QAing for bugs or things like that.
For me, it's, I play my games and levels over and over and over again, thinking like players do. What can I do to break this game? Some people get in the game and just go, where are the flaws? Where are the Easter eggs? How is it broken? So they can complain about it. So I actually spend a lot of my time doing things that players shouldn't do and just seeing if they can get away with it. What did the scoring do? Did they fall out of the level? Just being an old school gamer and playing so many games in my life, I know kind of what players do. They just do the unexpected things. And so I do it myself. So I'm my main tester. But like you said before, on the weekends, I've had as many as 15 people come over here on one day to play my games over and over again to get feedback and see what am I missing, or what levels do you like or don't like. And then I can start cutting ideas, or I throw ideas out there I haven't done yet and ask them, would this make the game better or worse? What do you think? And I can just, go by having them give me opinions.
Are there any particular tools out there for QAing games, VR games? Or is it pretty much just playing them?
I have not come across any that do that for you. In game design, you're supposed to do what's called unit testing. So you set up conditions, if you have a negative amount of money or you have an infinite number of something, and you test for it through those test cases. But as far as like in VR, it's all about checking for collisions and maybe recording if something collided through something else and it shouldn't, or an object ended up in a different part of the world it couldn't have gotten otherwise. But otherwise, with VR being such a new thing, their tools aren't quite there that I've seen that will help you.
Right. So there's no way to take like when you're queuing an app or something, you can take screenshots and stuff and go, okay, right here, this is where the issue is happening or something. You can't really do that in VR.
Nope, not that I know of.
I'm sure that'll, as the market matures, we're going to start getting these kinds of tools, because I can't believe that we have to do everything manual forever. I'm sure it'll mature and it'll make it easier for QA people.
Yeah, Unity is working on putting the actual ability to create VR experiences in VR. It's kind of in beta right now, but they actually have it. This is the rudimentary way to drop in assets and kind of place things without having to do it in 2D and then jump into 3D. So I'm waiting for that to get baked into the final tool. So it's not like an add-on, but that gets promising. Then anybody can start building worlds just by having the assets preloaded.
I saw a demo of that, and it was really cool. And I know you heard my other podcast, but I did an interview with Cosmo Schwarf about Mindshow, and it's kind of in the Mindshow one, you can actually do motion capture, and you go inside an avatar and you start talking like the avatar and start acting, start moving, and it's kind of like that, where you can create these scenes inside VR, which is amazing, right? Much better than creating it through Unity in a 2D version. So.
Yeah, I saw the booth. It premiered at VRLA last year. I saw the big booth they had set up for it, and I personally have not played it yet, but I love the idea of being able to act out a scene and just see how it looks. You can be any sort of wild character. So it's a great idea. I hope it takes off.
Highly recommend you download that one. So guide us through the workflow. Let's say for somebody that wants to create a game, what would be step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4? Just, big picture. What do you recommend that workflow be?
Up until the last decade or so, I'd actually been designing my stuff on pen and paper and actually a giant box of Legos. First, who doesn't like to play with Legos? And secondly, it allowed me to see the spatial issues as I'm designing levels of where things should be, how far apart and how tall they can be. And I was able to do stuff in the physical world before I spent too much time fixing issues in the code and whatnot. Once I became proficient with the Unity 3D engine, I now do everything strictly in the editor. I don't need to play with those Legos anymore. And in fact, vacuuming is now not quite as interesting, thankfully. But but for the game design process, I guess I actually begin with the end in mind. What's the end result? What's the feeling or the sense of accomplishment or the ultimate response that I want my player to have? What's the goal of why they played my game and why they want to come back? So then from that, I start coming up with a list of obstacles, challenges, and goals that I'll need to build in my game to then fulfill that design goal, along with keeping it fun. And that's probably one of the most hardest parts about game design is actually making something that's fun. And it's creating what they call in the industry, they call it game flow, for the player to not be too bored or too overwhelmed with what the gameplay offers. It's how do you make it both easy and hard at the same time? And so for that, I recommend there's a couple good books out there that help you understand this theory. One of them is called A Theory of Fun for Game Design. And there's another classic one that's been around for years, and it's called The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses. And they are both must-read books to kind of help you go through the process of creating a game that's has flow and isn't just so jumping all over and there's no real meaning to the game itself. So unless you're building like a puzzle sort of game, you'll probably be building a level for your game to be played on. And for that, I suggest making as many different levels as you can. Don't just say, here's the level, it's got to work, and this will be in the final thing. Actually make a bunch of iterations, make small changes to it, and play the different variations, and have other people play it too. And you might find out a level that you didn't really like that much actually has good play to it or is different for a way you didn't like. Because you're not necessarily making games for you, you're making them for the broad masses. So that's why I suggest making a bunch of levels and realize you're going to cut a bunch of them. They're just not going to make it to the final one. But instead of focusing on just 4 or 5 levels or 6 or 7, make like 40. And just make small iterations and find which ones have the right amount of, again, difficulty and easiness and make the game challenging. For people doing puzzle games, I suggest, doing it on pen and paper. If you can actually make the game working and have the game logic and say when this piece moves here to here, what's going to happen next, and you can get that working on paper, it'd be then much easier to then programming it. And if you're doing if it's your first game, if you're listening to this and you've never done anything, you want to do VR, I wouldn't start with VR. Start by learning languages. There's one called Scratch, which is very popular for young kids to make simple games. There's another one called Processing, and lots of tutorials on how to actually build just the logic. They're not graphically intense, but it's understanding the logic and looking for changes to the state of the game. And that's what you end up designing is the game looks like this, the player does an interaction, and the game state changes by the inventory went up or they died or a new character entered the room. And so by understanding those mechanics is great. So I recommend a couple different engines for making these types of games. One's called Game Maker Studio, and the other one's actually got a funny name. It's called the Game Salad Creator. So start with something like that. And of course, as we talked about before, you need to get feedback constantly. As you work on something, if you get frustrated and stuff, have people come over. Have your spouse or your kids or somebody, take a look at it. Show off what you're doing. Get feedback as soon as you can, because it can be frustrating to watch people play your game, but the reward is definitely worth understanding that, hey, I am going in the right direction. I didn't miss something. And so please don't skip the step of getting feedback as soon as possible.
What are the main tools you're using? Are you using like Unity or Unreal or?
So the main tools I'm using, as we've talked about, Unity 3D is all I know at this point. I also use Blender for my 3D modeling. Again, I can't make anything more than simple walls or simple structures, but Blender, because there's lots of tutorials and it's updated, lots of great one. And for sound effects, I've been using the free one that's been around forever called Audacity. So that's, for me personally, that's the only three I do. For video production side, I love doing that. I'm using Adobe Premiere. I've been using it for about 5 years. But there's nothing else that I need. Everything I do is I acquire assets through other people who then use Maya or 3D Studio Max. I personally don't use those tools or license them.
Have you done anything in 360 video for your VR experiences, like merged them or anything like that? Or
I would love to get into that. Don't have any 360 cameras, and I haven't played with. I know you can take two GoPros that have the same resolution and focal length and tape them together and make it, but I have not got into it. I like the fully digital world.
Right.
I know that lots of people will be covering the 360 stuff, so I'm going to kind of avoid it, but I love watching them.
Sure,
I think they can be relaxing.
Yep,
yeah.
yeah.
But
no, it's definitely interesting. I mean, I shoot with the Theta, the Ricoh Theta 4. Or Ricoh Theta V, and that shoots 4K, and then I just bought the E360 VR. So I want to do a mixture of both VR and 360. That's one of my goals there. In the programming world, as you're aware of, there's version control. Is there such a thing in the VR world? And so what do you use?
So, initially I was working by myself and I didn't use version control. At work, we were using one called Subversion, and I knew the benefits of being able to track your changes and having a history of the work that you did. So I started looking around, and I came across Git. I thought it was a funny name. I didn't really know what it was, and of course learned about GitHub and said, wow, this is what I'm going to start using. So I actually learned that Microsoft has their product called Visual Studio Team Services. It's free for up to 5 contributors to make changes. GitHub can do it too, but they're for free. It's a public repository. Anybody can see it and make changes, can contribute if you allow it. I decided to just go with Visual Studio Team Services because it just works. I know Microsoft do a good job.
The free version, yeah.
The free version. And when I heard that Microsoft was starting to use Git and stop using their Team Foundation services, then I was like, wow, Git must be the one. So that's what we're going with today.
Yeah, I've used Git and GitHub, and you can pay the free version. Yeah, everybody has access to your code, but you can also pay, and I think it's like, I don't know, I forgot what it was because it was a while ago, but it was super cheap.
$7 a month.
Yeah, and it's unlimited projects. So it's, if you're making money, it's a no-brainer. So let's talk about support because, you work full-time, you do this on the side too, and then you write games, and people, as we know, when you post stuff on Steam, people start asking questions, they start making comments. How much of your time do you spend in doing any kind of support for your game?
Yeah, so up until today, we've only had one title release on Steam. It's a horror experience called Final Rest. In the year and a half it's been out, not one single person's asked for a bug fix or an update or a suggestion. So it's been kind of quiet. My game isn't a game. It's just a 4-minute horror experience. So I think it's kind of being missed. The reviews aren't that great on it. But so far up to now, I haven't had to do any support. But if for our next title, I know we're going to be asking for a lot of feedback. And so for those titles, I'm going to welcome, feedback on email, social media. Today, now, the most common thing to do is set up they call a communication channel using tools like Slack, Discord, Telegram, getting popular, and that allows people to essentially log in all day and complain about your product or give suggestions, and so for now, my kind of idea is, because I'm such a kind of a one-man studio at this point, when I get my first game out there, I'm going to get some fans. They're going to love the game, and maybe a few of them will people want to donate their time and hang out on the channel and help give feedback. Oh, yeah, if you're having a problem with this, here's what you do to fix it, or I'll take suggestions. So, I mean, I'm hoping to do this full time at some point, but for now, I'm really hoping on the community maybe helping me out. Otherwise, it'll just be nights and weekends.
Well, that, what your comment that you just made actually goes to my next question. It's a perfect segue for this, which is, how do you monetize this? Because ultimately, you want to do what you love, right? Which is VR, and you want to do it full time. And right now, you're obviously doing it part time. Do you have a plan to migrate away into this, making this a full time thing? Or do you always see it, not just for you, but in general, for most people, unless you're a AAA kind of studio, for most people, do you see this as a part time thing?
So when you start off, if you've never made a game before, you're not going to make a AAA title your first time. You're going to have to make several different iterations before you can probably get your game noticed and seen. I'm what's called an indie developer. I'm not being financed by anybody else. There's no one standing over my shoulder. The good news is no one's standing over my shoulder to say, build it this way. The bad news is there's not any money yet. So one of the statistics I've read about this topic is that nearly 90% of all games are commercially unsuccessful. Some games just don't even hit their target audience until maybe the sequel comes out or the right article picks it up. So for me, the trick is, how do we reward our customers and bring more to what the game is besides just the game itself? And what I mean by that is, if I want people to give me money, I want to appreciate them or show thanks. And so I'm thinking of ideas about, promoting people who play my game and get high scores by, giving them, swag, t-shirts, or promoting them on social media saying, this is the best gamer I've seen in a while. He plays on, if it's a multiplayer game, he plays on Friday nights, at 6 o'clock, come and challenge him. So I'm still working on that. I'm meeting people here and there that say they want to help finance me. I'm actually a friend of Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari. He's got some projects going on, and we've been meeting about VR. He's got his own company called Modal VR, and they're into the large room scale experiences that we're starting to see pop up, like The Void, and another one called Zero Latency. Him and I are staying in touch. There's a chance he might fund me, but at this point, it's just get something out there, do the very best you can, and hopefully you'll get an audience. Just advertise it as much as you can. Ask people to review it. They do these things called playthroughs. Some of these channels have 100,000 people watching playthroughs of games, and if the right one picks you up, I think you can have a hit even for a small indie title.
So, you kind of touched upon a little bit on this, but your marketing plan, it sounds like it's really getting these gamers involved to play your game, to review them. What other kinds of tips do you recommend from a marketing perspective to stand out? Because just putting it on Steam, it's you and, it's not a billion games right now from a VR perspective, but it's getting there.
So these days for marketing, of course, it's all about putting yourself on social media and getting people to follow you and like and post shares of your pictures, your posts, and your playthroughs. I personally, how I learn about new games is by watching my favorite YouTubers. A guy named Tribal Instincts who does reviews, Sweeviver, and the two guys from the Tested channel, Norm and Jeremy. They have their weekly show called Projections. It's a matter of, asking them, if you have a moment, please take some time. Of course, they got a lot of requests, but getting one of them to just show your game on their channels that have hundreds of thousands of viewers, some of them, will then help you get noticed. Of course, getting written up in online magazines and news sites like Upload VR and Road to VR, VR Scout would be invaluable. I've been in contact with them on a few of my things, and they're saying, when you're ready to, have a public unveiling, that's what we do. We report news on indie games. We'd love to have you. So it's not like you have to beg too much. It's basically, here's what I'm working on. I'm working on for a few years. Please have a little article about what I'm doing and why I think it's different and great. And they're glad to help you out. They're glad to retweet your posts and stuff. So just clearly asking some of these bigger people, they're glad to help, because of course we all want to promote VR and make sure that it has this final chance of being successful and help change the world.
Those are definitely some great tips. So really appreciate that. Alex, unfortunately, we're pretty close to the end here. I do have one last question, which I ask all my guests, is for you to describe what you would like VR to be like in the year 2025. I don't know why I picked 2025, but in the future, what would you like VR to be like?
I have a really good answer for this, I hope. So first thing I want to mention is that everyone who even has a passing interest in VR should go see the movie Ready Player One. written by Ernest Cline and directed by Steven Spielberg. I've seen it 4 times, and you just got to see it to see what the vision, what VR can do. In that movie, it depicts a world where literally everyone spends their entire day in VR. And just like the movie The Terminator by James Cameron, it is a cautionary tale about artificial intelligence gone awry. And Ready Player One warns us of ignoring the real world too much, and that a balance must be found between the perfectionism of the digital world and the global issues that still await us in the physical one. There's a TED Talk that everyone please has to go watch. It's from 2010, and this TED Talk is called Gaming Can Make a Better World by a gal named Jane McGonigal. She's a game designer, and she works at a place called the Institute for the Future. It's iftf.org. And in that talk, she describes many of the world's problems like hunger, poverty, global conflict, and obesity, and how a well-designed game and play conditions could gamify our reality and make it better by solving world problems, by having us work together and then produce for humanity what she calls the epic win. So here's what I hope for the next 7 years. I hope that VR turns every mundane task that we do, in the online world. Obviously, it's not the physical world. We still got to do our chores. But I hope that VR can gamify life. I really want education to be embraced. And I want the fact that every student learns at their own pace in the classroom, and I want that outdated way of learning to be replaced. I'd like to see each student be given a monthly or possibly weekly assessment of how they learn, their favorite topics, and that VR can then train them exactly at the right pace, and again, gamify the learning experience. So many of us have played games, maybe word games or puzzle games, where we were learning math or learning about new words, but we didn't realize we were learning because it was just fun, it was gamified. I keep reading about young adults these days don't even know how to be an adult. There's this topic or concept called adulting. And I think that, it's ironic to me, the process of adulting needs to be taught. And so for me, the perfect showcase for VR would be to teach anybody who doesn't know how to do even the mundane things like, iron clothes, mow the lawn, cook meals, or change a tire. It can then teach us. So that's what I want to see people doing. I do like the entertainment side of VR, but I really want to see the education of it being there so that, oh man, I don't know how to fix my plumbing in my house. Yes, there's lots of YouTube videos, but if you can actually hold a wrench in VR and know how to turn a valve and do that stuff, that's where I really see the power of VR coming to help humanity. So here's my last part. Ultimately, my hope for humanity is this, that it will free our minds of the physical bodies and give us experiences beyond even that of superheroes or our wildest dreams. I believe that everyone's day could be that much brighter if we can just take a virtual vacation anywhere, talk to and see all of our loved ones, no matter the distance that they are away from us, and just have this global connectedness that we don't quite have yet. And I think VR, being a 3D space, can help bring the minds of the world together to help us solve the problems that we have and get us through this next century.
Alex, you are definitely a fantastic person, not just in VR, but in general. I love your outlook in life. Your energy is just way out there, man. I don't know how you do it. I don't know what you're taking, but you got to share some of that with me.
Passion for life, passion for giving, helping.
Good for you, man. Seriously. No, really. Alex, it's been great talking to you. I know we could talk for another hour because there's tons of other questions I didn't get to, but maybe we'll have you back here and we'll continue this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for the awesome interview and great job with these podcasts. Please keep it up.
Thanks, Alex. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, do you want to give them a URL, Twitter, whatever you want? Just throw it all out there.
Yeah, I'm a slipgate.com, slipgate.com, or all the social media sites. I am at Slipgate Studios. To email me, I'm alex@slipgate.com. And we'd love to hear the first question I always ask is, what VR experience would you like to do? What's the one thing you've always wanted to do? And we'd like to create it for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Alex. And to the rest of you, I'm glad you were here with me. If you enjoyed this podcast, please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and like us on iTunes or SoundCloud. For more episodes, check out howtocreatevr.com/iTunes or howtocreatevr.com/SoundCloud. If you are ever in the Southern California area, we have a monthly meetup with lots of great presentations. You can join or RSVP for our next meetup at howtocreatevr.com/meetup. Finally, if you are interested in learning more about how to create VR experiences, please visit howtocreatevr.com. So until the next episode, I'm your host, Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.